I used to brag that I could play any part, but I never expected the CEO of Starfall Industries to take me seriously and draft a contract the very next day. She had spent a decade collecting my life like evidence, including the textbooks I lost in college, my missing fountain pen, and even a Superman Band-Aid I once gave a stranger on a rainy night. She went as far as using my old photos to create an ideal lover profile, and then used that profile to hire me as a high-paid specialist. It turns out the campus debate champion she was too shy to pursue years ago had finally become her exclusive stand-in, someone she could legally own for the right price. My phone began to vibrate on the kitchen counter while I was out on the balcony, tending to some withered greenery. To be specific, I was watering Olivia Covington's dying potted plants. The text was brutally efficient, stating the contract was terminated effective immediately and I had to vacate by tomorrow. It was classic Olivia, never one to waste words on pleasantries. I let out a low whistle and tossed the phone onto the sofa while pinching a dead leaf off the stem. I muttered that it was about time to kick the bucket, though even I wasn't sure if I was talking to the plant or my career. Packing had become second nature to me. After 3 years in this luxury penthouse, I had left fewer personal traces behind than a guest in a high-end hotel. Every expensive suit in the closet had been custom-tailored by Olivia to perfectly mimic Ethan Sterling's wardrobe. From the precise placement of the cufflinks to the specific brand of cologne, everything had to match her vision. Even the underwear in my dresser had to conform to the Ethan Sterling aesthetic she adored. I reached into the nightstand to pull out my heavily annotated copy of the Professional Stand-In's Handbook. Turning to the final page, I placed a crisp check mark next to Olivia Covington's name. The project was 100% complete, including the bonus service of pretending to forget her birthday. My goal had been to induce guilt and reinforce her emotional dependency on me. I made a mental note to send the final invoice before the day was out. Just as I was running the numbers, the electronic lock beeped and Olivia walked in, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. She glanced at my half-packed suitcase and her brow furrowed. She asked if I was really in that much of a hurry to get out of there. I told her that the job was done and a clean break would be better for everyone involved. I mentioned it would be good for her and good for him as well. I smiled and noted that she hadn't even bothered to ask why the contract was ending ahead of schedule. I pointed out that since Ethan Sterling was returning, it was time to clear out the knockoffs and make room for the genuine article. I pulled a neatly folded document from my pocket and snapped it open with a practiced flick of my wrist. I told her it was the service termination agreement and asked for her signature along with the final wire transfer to my new account. She just stood there staring at me with an expression like she had bitten into a sour lemon. It took me back to our first meeting 3 years ago during a massive rainstorm when my beat-up Camry died in the middle of the road. While I was busy swearing and trying to push it to the shoulder, a sleek black Maybach glided to a stop right next to me. The tinted window rolled down to reveal a face as cold and elegant as a marble statue. She asked if I was Lucas Miller. I wiped the rain from my eyes and joked that luxury car dealerships must be using targeted marketing now, then told her she had the wrong guy and my name was Captain America. She told me she had a job for me, but I told her I wasn't interested. My personal mantra is to never be greedy and never get played. Then she mentioned $50,000 a month plus expenses and bonuses, so I immediately asked what the job was. My sudden change in tone seemed to catch her off guard as she tossed a folder onto the passenger seat. She told me to be her boyfriend, but specified that I had to act exactly like the man in the file. I glanced at the photo and recognized Ethan Sterling immediately. That golden boy was plastered all over every financial news outlet in the country. I could see the resemblance if you imagine shaving off a bit of his jawline and dialing back the trust fund Brad energy by half. The hours were 24/7 and the job description was simply to become him. She finally looked me in the eye with an expression that I couldn't quite figure out. She started listing requirements like mimicking his diet and speech patterns, but I cut her off and told her I was a natural. I wrung out my soaked shirt and asked if the position came with a 401k and health insurance. Her lip gave a little twitch as she looked at me like I was losing my mind. I shouted that we had a deal right there in the pouring rain. Back in the present, Olivia stared at the termination agreement while her lips thinned into a hard line. She asked if I had anything else to say to her before I left. I told her that I actually did have one thing. I popped the head off my electric toothbrush and tossed it into the bin. I informed her that her shower had terrible water pressure and she should really look into a German brand for her next renovation. She stood there frozen for a long moment before turning and heading upstairs without a single word. I whistled a happy tune as I shoved my last shirt into my bag. This entire job had been worth every penny. My phone buzzed again with a message saying there was a gala tomorrow night and I was expected to attend. I raised an eyebrow and started typing back immediately. I reminded her that according to our contract, I had the right to refuse any extra requests once the termination notice was served. I worried that sounded a bit too cold, so I added a shrugging cat emoji at the end. She called me 3 seconds later and used my name in that typically icy tone of hers. She explained that Ethan's flight was delayed and he wouldn't be back until the charity ball later that week. I snapped my suitcase shut while tossing the base of the electric toothbrush into the trash. I had replaced the heads plenty of times, but the base was the original one she had bought me. She said she expected me to finish out the remaining days of the contract as a matter of professional courtesy. I almost burst out laughing at the idea of a good ending since she had never cared about that before. For 3 years, I had been her personal Ethan at every event from high-end restaurants to boring charity galas. I smiled when she told me to and frowned on command without question. I told her that wasn't a problem, but noted that it would be billed at the premium temporary rate. I explained that the contract dictated triple the usual daily pay once termination had been initiated. She stayed silent for a moment before asking if I was really that desperate for cash. I told her I was absolutely broke and reminded her that next month's rent wasn't going to pay itself. I suggested that if she felt bad for me, she could always throw in a massive severance package. Then I cursed under my breath, realizing I had thrown my toothbrush away far too soon. I hovered by the trash, wondering if I should fish it out and just give it a quick rinse. I figured it would be as good as new, but then the line went dead. She had hung up on me. I shrugged it off and tossed my phone aside before heading to the kitchen for a drink. The entire liquor cabinet was stocked with Ethan's preferred labels, which were far too pretentious for my liking. I had never actually grown fond of the stuff, even after 3 years. I hadn't even taken a sip before Olivia walked back in with a garment bag in her hand. She still looked a bit chilled from the night air as she noticed the glass in my hand. She tossed the bag toward me and told me to change into it for the gala tomorrow. I caught the bag and unzipped it right there to find a navy suit that was a dead ringer for the one Ethan wore in his profile photo. She mentioned the tie clip was in the left pocket while staring at my packed luggage. She asked again if I was really in such a rush to get away from her. I told her it was all about professional integrity as I raised my glass in a mock toast. I explained that in my line of work, timing is the most important thing. Once the original returns, the counterfeit has to know when to bow out. Her fingers tightened on her leather clutch until the material began to crease. She told me not to be late for 7 o'clock tomorrow and then walked out. The sound of her heels on the hardwood was sharp and unforgiving. I took a long sip of the whiskey and yelled after her to remind her to wire the extra fees. The door slammed so hard that the frame rattled. I laughed to myself while checking my phone to let a new contact know I was officially on the market for new projects. A few days later at the Hudson Charity Ball, I found a quiet spot to observe the room while swirling my champagne. Ethan Sterling was right in the middle of the crowd, looking every bit like royalty, with everyone fawning over him. He was wearing a custom suit that probably cost more than a car, accented by a silver lapel pin that was identical to the one I was wearing. I found it hilarious as I looked down at my own lapel. Olivia had given me the pin last month and told me it was Ethan's favorite designer. It seemed the real Ethan didn't mind having a twin in the room. Ethan approached me from behind with a voice that was far too smooth and condescending. He said it was a surprise to see me there and mentioned he hadn't realized I shared his taste in luxury brands. I turned around and offered him a brilliant smile while raising my glass. I complimented his taste, but told him flat out that my pen was just a high-quality replica. I explained that Olivia had been worried I might embarrass him, so she bought me a knockoff to keep up appearances. He took a refined sip of his drink and regained his cool before commenting that Olivia seemed very attentive toward me. I just shrugged and told him it was all in the job description. I noted that she paid for a premium experience, and it was my responsibility to deliver exactly that. His eyes went ice cold for a second before he plastered that fake smile back on his face. He told me I'd work hard, but now that he was back, the replacement could finally step aside. I let out a sigh of mock relief and told him I was looking forward to the vacation. I added that I hoped Olivia would be able to adjust since I'd been much more attentive than the real version. I saw a flash of anger in his eyes, but the lights dimmed before he could say anything else. The announcer began the charity auction, which forced him to drop the subject and head back to his table. I was heading for a refill when I noticed someone watching from the balcony above. Behind the glass stood Victoria Reed, the powerhouse CEO of Starfall Industries. She looked stunning in a deep green gown while she idly toyed with the rim of her glass. Her eyes scanned the room with a thoughtful expression until they finally locked onto mine. We shared a brief moment before she raised an eyebrow and gave me a knowing smile. Then she vanished back into the shadows of the VIP box. That was certainly interesting. I turned back toward the stage just as Ethan was grandly taking Olivia's hand in front of everyone. He announced to the room that the final auction item was a joint donation from the two of them. He claimed the rings were a symbol of a promise they had made long ago. The entire room started whispering as cameras flashed all around the couple. Olivia looked a bit dazed for a second before she fixed her face into a perfect, graceful smile. Her eyes searched the crowd until they found mine for a split second. I just raised my glass and mouthed a silent congratulations before finishing my drink. I was back at the penthouse late that night, making a pot of ginger tea like I always did. Olivia had a habit of overindulging, and taking care of her had become my silent job over the last few years. I heard her walking in just as the kettle began to whistle. She walked through the door with flushed cheeks, but her eyes were like ice. She ignored me completely and went straight to the fridge for some cold water. I told her the tea was ready and let her know I had added honey to help with the hangover. She finally turned to me with a sarcastic remark about me being the perfect employee until the very end. I just smiled and told her it was professional courtesy since she had paid for the full package. She stared at me for a long time before grabbing the cup and draining it in one gulp. She slammed the mug down and told me not to bother coming in tomorrow because the money would be sent to my account. I waved at her as she walked away and told her I hoped she and Ethan would be very happy together. I showed up at the Covington Group offices the next morning with a big smile and a folder in my hand. I told Olivia I was there to settle the final bill while she sat behind her massive desk typing away. She didn't even bother to look up at me. She told me to just leave it on the desk, but I told her that wouldn't work. I sat down across from her and pulled out a thick stack of papers that were neatly bound together. I explained that it was the service manifest, and I needed her to review and sign it before the payment could be finalized. She finally looked up at the 20-page document with a confused expression and asked what it was. I adjusted my glasses and told her it was a detailed breakdown of all services rendered. I cited the contract clause that required a full service log to be submitted within 3 days of termination. She gave me a freezing look, but took the paperwork anyway. I made myself comfortable in the chair and watched as she started flipping through the pages. I could see her face getting tighter with every second that passed. Item 37 was the deliberate neglect of our anniversary, which carried a triple rate multiplier for emotional compensation. It was dated June 18th, and the notes mentioned it was highly effective. I had recorded a 15% spike in her emotional dependency following the incident. Olivia stopped flipping pages and asked in a shaky voice if I had done that on purpose. I kept smiling and told her it was all based on behavioral psychology. I explained that using calculated guilt is a great way to increase a client's attachment to the stand-in. Her knuckles were white as she sped through the rest of the document with a darkening expression. She saw entries for mimicking Ethan's specific cough and even the late-night hangover deliveries I had categorized as value-added services. I had even billed her for the time it took to adjust my walking gait to match his perfectly. She slammed the folder shut once she reached the end and looked like she wanted to kill me. She asked if I really considered that a service manifest, and I told her that professionalism was my top priority. I slid a thumb drive across the table and told her it was a bonus gift containing all the training footage I used to master Ethan's mannerisms. You could have cut the tension in the room with a knife. She bolted upright and pointed to a specific line in the manifest with a trembling finger. She demanded to know if the time I brought her medicine during a storm was just another act. I leaned in to check the entry and pulled up a weather report from that night on my phone. I pointed out that the high humidity qualified it as an extreme weather service, which usually came with a 50% surcharge. I told her I hadn't brought it up at the time because she was too busy crying on my shoulder. She went completely pale, as if I had doused her in freezing water. I offered her a pen and asked how she wanted to handle the final payment. She ignored the pen and stared at me with her chest heaving as she asked if any of it had ever been real. I told her I almost forgot the customer satisfaction survey and pulled a pink sheet of paper from my pocket. I mentioned that a 5-star rating would give her a discount on future services, although I assumed she wouldn't be needing me again. The pen clattered to the floor as she took a shaky breath and buzzed her assistant on the intercom. She told Gina to wire the full amount immediately, while I stood up feeling like a weight had been lifted. I gave the thumb drive one last nudge and told her the part where I practiced Ethan's golf swing was particularly good before wishing her a nice day. By the time I hit the sidewalk, I saw the notification that the wire transfer had cleared in full. I called a contact and let them know my previous contract was over and I was looking for new work. I glanced up at the penthouse window and saw a silhouette watching me from above. I gave a cheerful wave and melted into the crowds of downtown New York. The morning sun hit the edge of my cup as I sat in a small cafe. I stirred the dark liquid and noted that the beans were definitely over-roasted and left a bitter aftertaste. It was a far cry from the high-end brews I used to make with the $20,000 machine in Olivia's kitchen. Ethan Sterling's voice cut through the air from behind me. I turned to find him looking like a Forbes cover model in a perfectly tailored suit. I gestured toward the empty chair and lazily invited him to take a seat. He sat down and began scanning me with a look of pure judgment that immediately put me on edge. He skipped the small talk and mentioned he heard my contract with Olivia had ended. I took another sip of my mediocre coffee and told him he was right and that I was officially out of a job thanks to him. He gave a little chuckle and slid an envelope across the table. He told me not to be so dramatic and claimed he actually owed me a debt of gratitude. With a voice full of fake sincerity, he said that my work had made her much easier to handle over the last 3 years. I just raised an eyebrow and waited for him to keep talking. He explained that it was a recommendation letter from a friend and that someone with my unique talents would surely find it useful. I opened the envelope and saw it was for a senior assistant role at some mid-level firm with a salary that wasn't even 20% of what I was used to making. I told him he was incredibly generous, but I wouldn't be needing the favor. I explained that I was already lined up for a new gig. His smile faltered as he asked which company I was joining. I just winked at him and said it was a private contract and that client confidentiality was my top priority. His face went dark as he tapped his fingers on the table and warned me not to get too greedy. I told him I was perfectly happy and very grateful for what I had earned. Then I asked him if he even knew how Olivia liked her coffee, which clearly confused him. I informed him that she only takes 1.5 pumps of vanilla syrup and never 2. I looked at the coffee he had ready for her and told him he had already ruined her order. Ethan looked absolutely furious just as a text message from Starfall Industries popped up on my screen for a meeting tomorrow morning. I stood up and told him I had to go because my new boss didn't handle tardiness well. He stared at me and laughed while saying I was nothing more than a professional placeholder who was just looking for a new paycheck. I adjusted my cuffs and flashed him a grin while admitting I was a stand-in, but at least I got to pick who I work for now. As I walked out, I spotted the black Maybach parked across the street with the window halfway down. I could see Olivia's silhouette watching us from the shadows. I wondered if she had set this meeting up just to watch me. She was finally seeing that I wasn't the submissive puppet she thought she had paid for. I stepped out into the city air and walked toward a dark blue Bentley waiting by the curb. Victoria Reed was sitting in the back with her sunglasses on and a smirk on her face. She complimented my performance as I climbed in and asked her if this meant the interview was officially starting. On Olivia's birthday, the company's software automatically cleared her entire schedule for the day. A notification popped up telling her to enjoy her mandatory holiday. She buzzed Gina and demanded to know when she had ever authorized such a thing. There was a long pause before Gina explained that I had added that protocol to the system the previous year. She mentioned that I had noted her birthday usually overlapped with her cycle and that she never took time off to recover. Olivia just stared at her keyboard in total silence. She went to the break room for some water and found a yellowed sticky note inside the fridge. It was a guide I had written for her on how to manage her cramps without ending up in the hospital. I had told her to eat before taking meds and to avoid coffee unless she wanted an ulcer. The last tip suggested that cursing my name twice was clinically proven to reduce pain. I had even drawn a little stick figure of her rolling around on the floor in pain. She stared at it for a while before carefully sticking it back where she found it. When she got home later that night, she found a fridge stocked with the exact brand of ginger tea she liked. She wondered out loud when the tea had been bought. Gina happened to be there with some paperwork and mentioned that I used to restock the supply every single month. She explained that I knew she needed it exactly 3 days before her cycle started. Olivia looked shocked and asked how Gina knew her schedule. So Gina showed her a digital copy of the operations manual I had left behind. Gina told her that I had sent over a detailed manual before I resigned. Olivia scrolled through and saw an entry about switching her preferred brand of pads because Ethan's ex was a spokesperson for the other company. I had even included a rule about restocking the tea because I knew she never checked the pantry herself. Olivia slammed the door shut in frustration. She had a dream that night about the penthouse being covered in my sticky notes. There were reminders for the coffee machine and specific instructions on how not to drown her plants. One note even warned people to evacuate if her eyebrows moved up by half an inch because a tantrum was coming. Ethan pushed a coffee toward Olivia, but she took one sip and immediately made a face. She complained that it was way too sweet. Ethan didn't even look up from his phone and claimed he just ordered it the normal way. She set the cup down and firmly told him that she only takes exactly 1.5 pumps of syrup. Ethan asked her why she was being so difficult all of a sudden. He let out a dismissive laugh and asked when she had become so high maintenance. Olivia looked at her reflection in the coffee and could only think of how I used to use a thermometer to make sure the milk was at the perfect temperature. A massive storm rolled through the city a few days later, and her car died on a dark road. She called Ethan to ask for a ride while the rain pounded against her roof. Ethan sounded like he was at a party and told her he was too busy to come help. He suggested she just call an Uber and hung up. The rain was blurring her vision through the glass as she felt a wave of nostalgia. She remembered a night just like this one a year ago when I had shown up out of nowhere. I was completely soaked, but I had managed to keep a dry coat ready for her. I had joked about charging her an extra 50% for storm rescue before telling her the first one was on the house. The elevator pinged as it reached her floor, and she looked up hoping to see me there. She whispered my name, but the car was completely empty. She saw her own lonely reflection in the mirrored walls and let out a cold, empty laugh. We were in the boardroom at Starfall Industries, and the city lights were glowing through the massive windows. Victoria Reed slid a new contract toward me with a playful smirk on her face. I looked at the cover and saw it was titled Personal Service Agreement. The document was even thicker than Olivia's old contract. I asked her whose place I was taking this time and suggested it might be an ex or a long-lost love. She just rotated her wrist and let her bracelet clink against the glass. She told me the name didn't matter, and I just needed to follow the profile she had provided. I opened the file and felt my heart skip a beat. The target was an 18-year-old male who loved bacon, egg, and cheese sandwiches without ketchup. He spent all his time on the second floor of the NYU library on weekday afternoons. The notes even mentioned that he spun his pen whenever he was lost in thought. I started laughing and told her the guy sounded exactly like me. I asked if her first love had gone to NYU as well. She just handed me a pen and told me that was exactly why she had hired me. The pen was heavy and made of high-quality metal with intricate engravings. I felt a tiny scratch on the clip that felt familiar and I froze. It looked identical to the favorite pen I had lost back in my college days. Victoria asked if everything was all right, but I just brushed it off and signed the paper. I complimented her on her mystery man's taste and then kept reading the fine print. The itinerary was full of locations like the Bleecker Street Bodega and the Bobst Library. It felt like someone had mapped out my entire life from 10 years ago. There was no doubt about it anymore. Victoria's first love had definitely been a classmate of mine. She told me we would start at 7 the next morning at the bodega. She reminded me one last time to skip the ketchup on the sandwich. I remembered an old quote of mine from the school paper about whether another version of me would have a better life. It was ironic that I was now making a career out of playing that exact person. I guess I really was born to be a stand-in. Victoria's assistant handed me a photograph of a teenager from behind wearing a white shirt and jeans in the rain. She told me, with a professional tone, that I needed to recreate that exact look. I looked at the boy and realized it was almost like looking into a mirror from a decade ago. She explained that this was the client's ideal version of the man from September of 2015. I laughed as I held the shirt up to the mirror. I actually had the exact same shirt sitting in my own closet at home. The assistant actually looked startled when I stepped out in the new clothes. I did a little spin and asked her if the resemblance was good enough. She didn't say a word, but just gestured for me to go into Victoria's office. I rolled my sleeves up to my elbows before entering, just like the boy in the picture had. Victoria was standing by the window with her back to me, and her shoulders were stiff. I asked her if the look met her expectations. She turned around slowly, and I noticed her hand shake as she held her coffee cup. She told me it was perfect, but asked me to unbutton the top of the shirt. I followed her instructions, but mentioned that her file about him being in Boston that day must have been wrong since the photo was taken at our old high school. Victoria sat alone in her office, clutching an old sketchbook. The pages were filled with notes about a boy in a white shirt waiting in the rain. A single tear fell onto the paper and blurred the ink where she had written about him waiting for her at the school gate. I asked her where the destination was as I buckled my seatbelt. She told me we were just heading to a new retro restaurant that had recently opened downtown. When we pulled up to the brick building, I felt a lump in my throat because it was the exact spot where my favorite college diner used to be. Victoria asked if everything was okay, so I just forced a smile and complimented the decor. The waiter sat us by the window and suggested we try the Galaxy lemonade. He mentioned it was a secret recipe that everyone in the building loved. I gripped the menu tightly as he spoke. That was the exact drink I had invented during my freshman year, using special flowers to change the color of the tea. Victoria ordered 2 of them while watching me closely. When the drinks arrived, the coasters were actually made from old clippings of the campus newspaper. The clipping was an old profile on me back when I was a debate champion in college. It mentioned my love for that specific diner and my custom lemonade recipe. I looked up to see Victoria stirring her drink and watching it change from blue to purple just like I used to. I told her that her research was incredibly thorough. She just gave me a small smile as a bead of water dripped onto the coaster and blurred the text. The final line of that old interview was still visible, stating my hope that someone would one day remember who I truly was. The neon lights of the bar danced across Ethan's glass as he worked on his 3rd drink. His tie was loose, and the corporate golden boy persona had completely evaporated. He slurred his words while complaining about how cold Olivia had been to him lately. He started to mention how different she was when I was the one around. I swirled my soda water and realized that the genuine article couldn't even hold his liquor as well as the knockoff. He suddenly grabbed my wrist and demanded to know how I managed to get through to her. I just smiled and removed his hand while telling him it was a trade secret. The alcohol had finally won, and he leaned in close to whisper that I was actually a better version of him. I cut him off immediately and told him that if he kept talking, I would have to charge him a fee for keeping his secrets. I heard the sound of heels and looked up to see Olivia standing right there with a pale face. She looked back and forth between Ethan and me before noticing the payment app open on my phone. She asked in an icy tone if I was actually blackmailing him. I looked at the drunken mess next to me and then at Olivia's clenched fists before I let a smile spread across my face. I told her a professional always knows how to maximize his profits while waving my phone at her. I suggested that for an extra $100,000, I could forget everything Ethan had just told me. She told me that Ethan had claimed I was a better version of him, and then she slapped me across the face. My cheek was stinging, but I just kept smiling at her. I told her the price of my silence had just gone up to $200,000. Victoria's study smelled of old parchment and sandalwood as I scanned her massive collection of books. I stopped when I saw a worn-out economics textbook and realized it was my actual book from college. I opened it up to see my own messy signature right next to a goofy cartoon I had doodled years ago. I felt a headache coming on as Victoria texted me, saying she was stuck in a meeting and I should make myself at home. I sent a photo of the book to an old friend and asked if it looked like my lost copy. He replied immediately and reminded me that I had lent that book to a quiet transfer student who never gave it back. I suddenly remembered the quiet girl who used to sit in the back of the lecture hall. I had given her my book one day when she forgot hers and I never saw it again. I noticed the desk drawer was unlocked and found a small glass jar inside that held a single rusty button from a high school uniform. There was a note that said, "Thank you, Superman," resting right next to the button. I slammed the drawer shut as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I called Olivia and told her I would waive the $200,000 fee if she did a background check for me. She told me to get lost and asked if I was really calling her for a favor. After a brief silence, she agreed to help, but demanded a steep discount on any future services I provided. I sent over Victoria's details and mentioned she might have gone by a different name in the past. Olivia was in a private records room looking at a file for a girl named Tori Hale who had graduated from Northwood High in 2016. The photo showed Tori looking away from the camera and toward a podium. It was the same podium where I had been giving a commencement speech as the class representative. The glow of the screen made Olivia's pale face look even more ghost-like in the dark room. She had been suspicious ever since Victoria showed her that photo and had hired a private eye to dig into Ethan's past. The investigator found that Ethan's acceptance letter to Cambridge had been digitally forged. It turned out his father had even forged the recommendation letters from his professors. A bolt of lightning flashed outside and lit up an old photo of Ethan holding a trophy. He was standing in the exact same pose I had used in my old debate championship photos. Victoria's old diary sat in the corner with its pages damp and the ink beginning to run. She had written about how I saved her from bullies on a rainy day after they ruined her uniform. She wrote that I appeared like a superhero and that she wanted to spend her life becoming someone worthy of me. The sound of the rain outside finally triggered the memory in my mind. My own recollection of that night, 10 years ago, perfectly matched what she had written. I nudged the glass jar on the desk and watched the rusty button rattle against the sides. I unbuttoned the top of my shirt and asked if I still needed to pretend to be a stand-in for myself. Victoria started tearing the contract to pieces with a sad look on her face. She said the arrangement didn't make sense anymore now that the truth was out. I reached out and caught her hands to stop her from destroying the papers. I asked her if her only plan was to spend a decade getting rich just so she could hire me. I wanted to know if this was all just some game to her or if she just liked being in charge. She told me through a raspy voice that she had been looking for me since she returned home. She admitted she thought I was in love with Olivia since we were always together. I shook my head and reminded her that it was never anything more than a paycheck. She complained that I was far too loyal and never replied to messages from other women. She whispered that she had to go through a headhunter and invent a fake job just to get me in a room with her. The idea that I'd been acting as my own stand and was completely ridiculous. Victoria told me softly that she didn't want a replacement anymore. She just wanted me to be who I actually am. I asked her if I was really the one who got away and tried to wrap my head around the situation. It was a complete mess, but she just slowly nodded her head in confirmation. I asked her if she knew the saying about how nobody can ever live up to the memory of first love. I told her I wasn't as perfect as she remembered and that the illusion would eventually fade. She told me to be quiet and placed a finger over my lips to stop me from talking. She said she already knew what she was getting into. The moonlight was soft through the window, and for a second it felt like we were teenagers again. The news was showing a clip of Ethan Sterling looking absolutely livid as he lunged at a reporter. He grabbed the man by the collar and raised a fist while Olivia screamed for him to stop. The cameras caught everything as he landed a punch right on the journalist's jaw. Olivia turned off the television in her office and rubbed the faint mark on her finger where her engagement ring used to be. The screen on her desk was still showing all the files regarding Ethan's fake credentials. Experts had confirmed that his university transcripts were recent forgeries and his Wall Street internship was just a favor bought by his father. She whispered that I had been right all along about the real version not being able to compete with a memory. She scrolled through her photos and looked at every weather report I'd sent her over the last 3 years. Meanwhile, Victoria was at a press conference announcing that Starfall Industries was moving to acquire 20% of Ethan's family company. She claimed it was a justified response to a hostile takeover that Ethan's family had carried out against her own years ago. Before the press could ask questions, the screen changed to show Olivia making a live announcement. She stated that, as the majority shareholder, she was officially blocking the acquisition. Victoria asked on what ground she was blocking the deal, and Olivia told her it was because she was Ethan's fiancée. She raised her hand to show that the diamond ring was back on her finger. I was lounging on Victoria's sofa, scrolling through social media, while the rest of the city obsessed over the corporate drama. The trending topics were blowing up with news of Olivia's reunion with Ethan and Victoria's failed takeover. People were even calling me the ultimate pawn in their game. The Sterlings actually had the nerve to sue me for profiting off Ethan's likeness. Victoria paced around her office and said he was only doing it to distract the public from his own scandals. The courtroom was filled with flashing cameras as Ethan's lawyer accused me of fraud and defamation. He claimed I'd spent years impersonating his client for my own gain. Ethan just sat in the back looking smug and victorious. The judge asked if the defense had anything to say, and Victoria's lawyer stood up to present new evidence. A grainy video started playing on the monitors, showing me at 18 winning a debate. The lawyer explained that Ethan had stolen that exact footage to get into Cambridge by pretending it was him. He told the court that the real speaker in the video was actually Lucas Miller. The entire courtroom erupted in shock at the revelation. Ethan was back at the office, frantically tearing his degrees and certificates off the walls. Everything from his graduation honors to his internships was a total lie. He took a lighter to the seals and watched as his fake life melted away. He finally looked at the back of his debate medal and saw my initials engraved. He started laughing like a lunatic as he realized the truth. He shouted that I was never his replacement and that he had been living my life for the last 10 years. My legal victory didn't stop the internet from debating the ethics of my job. I wasn't bothered by it, but Victoria wanted me to clear my name once and for all. I stood before the reporters and told them I was there to set the record straight. I explained that being a professional stand-in is a legitimate career that deserves benefits and overtime. I showed a copy of a payslip that included a $50,000 bonus for emotional services. A few people in the crowd couldn't help but laugh at the numbers. I also pointed out that acting as a stand-in for yourself is perfectly legal and doesn't violate any contracts. When the screen showed my agreement with Victoria, the room went wild. The online comments were calling me a legend for becoming my own replacement. By that night, I was trending everywhere under hashtag about professional business. My follower count exploded and my inbox was flooded with people asking for advice or trying to hire me to play directions. Victoria was lounging on the couch, checking her phone regularly. She gave me a playful kick and told me I was more famous than her. I snatched the phone from her and left a comment asking for advice. We were on the roof and the wind was whipping around a blank check that Olivia was holding out to me. She told me to name my price to leave Victoria and come back to work for her. I just sighed and reminded her that she was the one who fired me in the first place. She gave me a sad smile and said she hadn't realized the truth back then. She tried to use my name, but I just shook my head. I told her it was over and reminded her that I never had any real feelings for her because it was just a job. She said said it didn't matter as long as I was there. Offer me a real job at her company. I gently cut her off and told her there was no need for it. I told her I was already in love with someone else and that I was sorry. The blank check flew out of her hand and disappeared into the city traffic below us. The next day, Victoria presented me with a new contract and asked if I was interested. It was a lifelong agreement for me to just spend the rest of my life being myself. I asked her about the pay, and she joked about whether yesterday's payment was enough. She showed me a picture of an old candy wrapper I had given her years ago. I reached in my pocket and pulled out a ring box wrapped in that exact same style of paper. I dropped to one knee and told her I had a lifelong contract of my own that needed a signature. Her eyes filled with tears, but she still acted tough and asked what it was. I opened the box to show her the diamond and told her the first rule was that she had to promise to always love herself first. She laughed through her tears and called me an idiot for making a contract that only paid me. I told her that was exactly how I liked it. I leaned forward and gave her hand a gentle kiss. Our wedding video went viral. The top comment was about how I finally stopped acting like someone else and started being myself. We had a huge bowl of Galaxy lemonade for the guests. Olivia was there drinking alone when a waiter handed her a fresh glass along with a small note I had written. The note said it had exactly 1.5 pumps of syrup and a hint of ginger. It was a final gift from her favorite former employee. This is a story about the ultimate irony. A man hired to be a shadow turns out to be the source of life. For years, Leo Vance was a professional replacement, only to discover that the man he was mimicking had stolen his own life. While one woman lost the real thing by treating it as a commodity, another spent a decade building an empire just to hire him back as himself. It serves as a powerful reminder that while you can hire a professional to play a part, true love is the only contract that requires no action, only the courage to be seen for who you truly are.